Thank you everyone for being here. Through the lens of this kind of panel discussion, thinking about, these stories, the challenging existing perceptions, maybe is there a through thread in your career about the kind of stories that you've been interested in, the kind of stories you want to tell? Maybe we can start with you, Deborah, because I know you have to leave us a bit early.
Yes. Thank you. Hi, my name's Deborah Draper. I'm a writer and director from Atlanta in the U.S. Thank you. To answer your question, I think for me, it was always critically important to find stories that resonated with who I am. My company is actually called Coffee Bluff Pictures, and it is the river that runs past my grandmother's house. They were enslaved on St. Catherine's Island, and that was the river that they actually took to freedom in the States. So being able to find these stories about people who did extraordinary things that aren't told, that are invisible, that don't find their way into the traditional canon of film or in books, that's for me where I find great joy and great curiosity. So the legacy of Black Wall Street, James Brown, Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, Versailles 73, those are some of the unscripted stories I've told to really center the African American experience globally, which I think is incredibly important because in the U.S., our stories are often very stilted. They don't necessarily include three-dimensional characters or the three-dimensional experiences. So that's what I like to bring to filmmaking.
Amazing. Thank you. Hopefully I'm going to get into some of your specific work before we have to say goodbye to you, but I'm passing over to Raquel.
Yes, I'm Raquel Antonia. I'm an actress and producer. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I'm also Italian. So I come from a multi-ethnic household. And for me, it was always, there weren't really people that looked like me on TV, but it never really bothered me. I was like, oh, I get to be different. Yeah. But then as I kind of got older and there were stories that I wanted to tell as an actress, and I realized that the opportunities just weren't there audition-wise. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll just make my own movies. And I was like, how do I do that? And luckily I have really amazing mentors and friends around me that I just kind of started asking questions, and I was like, all right, I'm just gonna do this. And for me, ethnically wise, coming from a multicultural household, I've dealt with this with a lot of friends of mine that when it comes to diversity in our industry, a lot of times they try to put diversity into boxes, and people can't be categorized like that. There are a lot of people that are multiple ethnicities that come from different households and backgrounds. So I like to call us like the in-betweeners, the people that you can't really categorize just by looking, and finding stories like that to tell is really what I'm passionate about.
Hello, everybody. I'm Thierry Bugaud from Paris, La Boîte dans la Boîte. And I'm here with a film about, the name is African Glory. And it's about very ancient empire in the 3rd century. And the emperor left Africa with 2,000 boats, 180 years before Christopher Columbus. So this is a very hard story to tell because it changed the history as we know it. And that's why I'm here today. Okay, thank you.
No, it's a great story that he's telling. It changes history. So, my name's Frederick. I'm a writer, director, producer, photographer, etc. So my love of of making documentaries is centered on the fact that as I was growing up, I was frustrated with the fact that I just didn't hear stories that about Black people that were inspirational, and I grew up around a lot of inspirational people and knew a lot of inspirational people and were inspired by a lot of inspirational people, and that was throughout the diaspora, and through circumstance and a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work. I ended up telling stories. My first film was called Black is the New Black, which was about Black British success. I hadn't heard anyone talk about what British success looked like that wasn't from the indigenous population. and decided that I wanted to go and tell that story. And I got 55 contributors to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We'll continue.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Donisha, I want to bring you into the room. If you could tell us a bit about your background and like what's been the driving force for you in terms of the kind of stories that you want to tell or put out into the world.
Sure. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. I grew up in Jamaica, but I also grew up on a tour bus, traveling with my mom and Siggy Marley and the Melody Makers. So I kind of saw how music had the capacity to make great impact in uniting people across various worlds through the socio-political theme. So I grew up always being kind of conscious of the world that we are in and the dynamics, but also the impact that human beings can have. And I always wanted to try to find a way to create space, starting as an actress, but I evolved into the world of film simply because we need to find more diverse ways of telling stories. So moving beyond entertainment and really looking at how we can use film as an art for decolonial impact is kind of what has inspired a lot of my storytelling.
Thank you. There seems to be a lot of resonance, I think, across the speakers. It's that idea of it's a need. It's almost like you don't have a choice because there's a space and that's not being filled. And you have to sort of taking control of that space and telling those stories. Deborah, before we lose you, I want to talk to you about you work kind of predominantly in unscripted and nonfiction. Maybe you could speak a little bit about why you think this is such an important way to tell these stories. And then also, I want to get stuck into the James Brown. If you could tell us a bit about bringing that project together, because you've got some heavy hitters involved in that series. So maybe you could just tell us a bit about making that.
Great. Absolutely. The James Brown story, obviously, it's EP'd by Mick Jagger and Questlove. It's on A&E right now, so you can check it out. It's also on Prime and Hulu, depending on where you live. I think when you take a figure, any figure in particular, but one that is as well known as James Brown, there are specific things that we think we know about him, but that's kind of always the case with culture, right? Everyone thinks they know everything about culture, but they don't. So it's incumbent upon us as filmmakers to figure out what is the thing that's really important that we want to tell. And for me, the music's fantastic. The dancing's amazing. He's the hardest working man in show business. But for me, it was to understand what is a Black man who has a 7th grade education. What was his driver to become that? And how was he able to navigate spaces in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even, until he died, so that he can maintain that? And what did he have to sacrifice in order to be that level of a star? And what did he find source-wise to be able to continue to do it for 50 years when things were changing around him? And I think looking at him against the context of America was really important for me. Jim Crow, civil rights, the birth of hip hop, because he's sampled 15,000 times in songs.
Wow.
Right? So how does this impact someone who's a genius? And how do you also, as a filmmaker and an artist, balance the genius with the demons? So that's kind of how I approached it. But in general, we need to find inspiration, and we need to actually be able to look at our own history, good, bad, ugly, and figure it out, and tell it, because we're invisible right now. In the U.S., we fight to be included in stories. We have a governor of a state that said slavery was an apprenticeship. So these are types of narratives that have to be countered. And that gives us a rich opportunity to not only counter them, but actually tell stories that crash and burn those kind of narratives so they don't resurface. So for all of the filmmakers out there, there's always a story that's going to burn in your soul and in your heart, whether it's narrative or whether it's unscripted. And you have to tell that because somebody else needs to hear that story. They actually need to feel that story. And usually if I need to feel it, somebody else probably needs to feel it too.
Mm-hmm.
And if I need to hear it, and that's kind of what I base it on, if I'm excited about it, I'm sure at least one other person might be excited about it. And that's how I go about, telling my stories, but they're always centered on Black folks. That's where I roll. That's where I want to be, because I think there are not enough stories that really dig in and really extract the lived experience in a way that's powerful and in a way that becomes a blueprint for other people.
Wow, thank you. I have about 4,000 follow-up questions, but we're about to lose you, and we also limited
And I'm
time.
so sorry. I have to leave, and I don't want to leave because you guys are amazing. But yes.
Two things that hopefully maybe you can, well, one of them is slightly bigger than the other. I wonder, if there's maybe, because I'm sure you looked through a lot of archive for this work. Was there any kind of fact or piece of footage or kind of really surprising thing that you found in that journey uncovering his life? And then also, I guess, just a bigger one, kind of jumping off what you were saying. What are the challenges behind trying to get these stories heard? Because I mean, there's a reason why they haven't been heard for a long time. People have kept them out. We've been actively kept out of this industry. So what are the challenges you found trying to put people back in the conversation? And what advice, I guess, would you give to people who have these stories that are really trying to get them made and then perhaps not being given the opportunity to?
I think the first challenge is always money, right? With James Brown, that was network. So that was 4 episodes for network. So I didn't have to worry about money. But on Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, the story of 18 African Americans who defied Hitler and Jim Crow, I had to worry about finance. I had to worry about who wanted me to tell a story about 18 Black athletes that got on a boat to Nazi Germany and their names weren't Jesse Owens, right? So that becomes a bigger challenge. That becomes, wow, I need to find interesting people. So it wasn't traditional financing. We literally cast a wide net to find any doctor, lawyer, dentist, cupcake maker, anyone who wanted to invest in this film, because you have to be creative with your financing. It's not always going to be a streamer is going to actually finance it. Sometimes it's going to be the person who lives down the street that doesn't even know they want to be a producer yet. They don't even know they want to be an investor until you present the story in a compelling way and they become attached to it. Legacy of Black Wall Street, Black millionaires murdered 100 years ago. That wasn't a story that anyone learned in school. So I wanted to be sure that story was told, because it's an incredible story. You got this 10-block radius of Tulsa, Oklahoma, with the most powerful African Americans in the country in 1921. They get to exist for about 7 or 8 years before they're massacred in their own homes and it's burned to the ground. So that particular story is really powerful, not from the standpoint of all the trauma, which there was a lot, but from the standpoint of they found freedom for a little while and they were able to find community and build something incredible that we can all learn from what they did, how they were able to come together and make their dollar last in their community 10 times. That's kind of my angle into the story. So I thought that was phenomenal. The archives are incredible because we never get to see them, right? Where are our archives is always the question. We don't know because we've been moved around so much that our archives never quite get to follow us. So whenever I get a chance to see archives of people of color, I'm like a little kid. It's like Candace, like, oh my God, look at this footage. And there were filmmakers in 1921, African American filmmakers. Oscar Micheaux, Sir Solomon Jones. There were many of them. And he wasn't the only one. There was a whole community of filmmakers in the 1920s and 30s. Most of the footage is lost, but some of it is still there. And those become tools for us to see how they distributed, right? To see they had, what we would consider, basic cameras, and they made beautiful things with basic cameras with talented actors and actresses. So they were able to do that. That means we have iPhones. We can make anything if they were able to make films back then. So that's kind of what I learned looking at the archives, because there was footage and there were photos and I was like, who the hell made this? This is like 100 years old. But it existed and I had no idea, which is why we have to exist, because no one knows, right? Until we show them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys. So sorry. There you go.
I'm actually going to jump to Simon, because I think a lot of what Deborah is saying resonates with some of the work that you're doing. Because in a way, I guess you're creating archive by we're creating these portraits of black, black success, like you said. So you've got Black is the New Black, but also They've Got to Have Us. Maybe you could talk a bit about creating these works and what was the kind of curation behind the people you wanted to get involved in those projects, and what was the kind of motivation and the experience of making them?
The motivation was, I think I picked on this yesterday, but the motivation was the fact that black art is always seen as being a minority art form and white art is universal. And I was just like, that's rubbish. Yeah. You know, it's like art is the highest form of intellect that we have as human beings. But also, you know, it's like I first met Spike Lee in 2001 when I was sent to photograph him. And, you know, we remained in contact ever since. But I also knew that when I was sent on that shoot to meet Spike, that they told me he was an angry little black man. Mm. And when I went to meet him and I told him that, and he fell about laughing, and we had a great time doing the shoot. But I often wondered why he was angry until I became that angry filmmaker. Yeah. And when I became an angry filmmaker, I realized that that's kind of like the brush that we were tarred with, that we were seen as angry. We were seen as angry because basically we had the ability to say no. And when you say no to people who are telling you that you should be grateful for the opportunity, then that becomes something else. So They've Got to Have Us was an ambitious project because firstly, it was me saying to the BBC that I could actually go out and get the 55 to 60 A-list contributors that we had in the show, and they didn't believe that was possible. You know, maybe you'll get one or two, but 60, it's a bit much. And when we got all of them, there's a story that I've never told, which I'm going to tell you now and be really quick with time. Yeah. No, it's a really good story. So basically, to get the contributors, I realized that I couldn't go and do this the usual way. So what I did was I went to CAA, I went to WME, I went to United Artists, I went to all of the agencies and pitched the idea. Okay. And said, I want you to then go out and do a blanket search through all of your agents to get involved and your agents to speak to your talent. Yeah. And it worked. Right. So the story that I haven't told people is that we were in post-production when we got a phone call from WME, who have been brilliant. They've given us a whole load of people anyway.
That's William Morris Endeavour.
William Morris Endeavour, for those who don't know. Thank you, Ronnie. The heckler in the front. And they came back and they said, right, okay, we have Denzel, they had a list of 12 A-listers that they said, right, these guys are now ready for you to interview. Mm. The BBC would not let us extend the production timeline to include those people in it. No. So that's a story that I've never told before. But what was their logic? Their logic was that they wanted a specific TX. We could have done it. We built it into the production schedule. We could have done it, but that's another story. But in terms of They've Got to Have Us, I'm particularly proud of that show because everybody in it, from Whoopi Goldberg to Lawrence Fishburne to John Boyega, and everyone in the middle of that, are extremely proud of the show. But what I am, proud of in particular is the amount of filmmakers of a new generation who have said that by watching that show, they've been inspired to join the industry. And that's really something that I'm genuinely very proud of. Oh, last thing I'm proud of is that they've got to have us as part of the curriculum in the United States. They actually teach it in high schools and universities.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, and I mean, this is why this work needs to be made. People seeing themselves and seeing what's possible on screen can change everything. So, congratulations on that work. Thierry, I want to move to your film. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about African Glory. How did you hear about this story? What's been your journey with creating it?
Oh, it was a very long way. I made the Manding Empire when I was shooting for a documentary in the north of Mali with Arabian nomads who live in Sahara and make a very long caravan of 1,500 kilometers to go search the site. The name is Azalai. And living with those amazing people in a kind of asceticism, I met very, very interesting other people who told me about Manding Empire and the great kings, the great emperors like Sundiata Keita and Mansa Musa. I think a lot of people know him, and I wanted to tell this story. Other cineasts, great cineasts, African cineasts, tell this story. The story of Sundiata Keita is very well known now. Mansa Musa also. And I wanted to make a kind of Buena Vista social club with a great artists from Manding like Salif Keita, Youssou N'Dour, and Cheikh Tidiane Seck. When I met Cheikh Tidiane Seck, he's an amazing artist. He used to play with Carlos Santana. He played with Jimi Hendrix. He's a very, very amazing Malian music producer. And he told me about the Abubakar Ida's story. You don't know this emperor who left Africa 180 years before Christopher Columbus. No, I don't know him. And I think from this moment, it became for me like a mission to tell this story. So he presented me great scientist about this story. And I learn, and I try to build the right production to tell this story, because we have very big obstacles, because it's a challenge European history. You know why? Because Christopher Columbus is the first. Because from the time of Christopher Columbus, there is a changement in area. It's the beginning of another area. So it changed European culture. If you attack this, it changes in America culture, because they don't want. In Mexico, we went in Mexico to see the places where, and sculptures where we can see the evidence of African presence in pre-Columbian times in Mesoamerica. After you have to see the film to understand, but the great scientists, some great scientists in Mexico say, no, we don't want to hear that story. because we don't want Mesoamerican civilization to have a contact with other civilization because it changes the perspective. And we have another problem in Africa because this story is kept secret by Hunters Fellowship. You know, Hunters Fellowship, and the Master Griots and Hunter Fellowship keep this story secret because it was catastrophic for the empire. Mansa Musa, who everyone now begins to know who is him, was the richest man of the humanity with $2,000 billion in gold. And this guy came just after Abu Bakr II when he left. And so when the emperor left Africa, he left with a lot of gold, with erudites, with scientists, with 2,000 boats full of this, and he never came back. So it is like a shame. And griots, master griots, and Hunters Fellowship decided to keep this in secret, like a shame. So we had to obtain the authorization from them to keep this, to give this story to the light, because we use what Abu Bakr says when he left Africa. He say, "I will never come back, but my name will return." So that's why I use. It was my argument from them on it's time now to for the name to return. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. And like Simon says, you're rewriting history, and that is scary, and disrupting history, and that's scary to people who rely on these narratives that have been built that on, as we say, on their truths, but missing out certain people from history. That's amazing. I'm going to go to Donisha. I wanted to talk to you because I know that your practice is very tied up in activism. So I just wanted to maybe you could speak about about that relationship between your practice and activism and social change. But I also wanted to ask you, this is 2 questions. I get all the questions in, about One Love and this story, it came out this year, I guess, in the UK. And people, I guess, re-engaging with your grandfather's story, but also maybe people discovering his legacy and his work for the first time, what that's kind of been like for you. So 2 different questions, but maybe you can answer them both.
I think 2 different questions that are definitely tied within a lot of ways. And I started out acting in theater, 17 years old in Jamaica, on stage for 4 years straight, and I went to Howard University to train. And while at Howard, it's the first time I started to explore the dynamics between Black people. Because in America, we're all just seen as Black. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that this conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion and all of this kind of thing. Because for me, before I identify as Black, if I don't, I identify as Afro-Caribbean. And before that, I identify as a Rasta woman, which is from an indigenous culture. But nobody wants to hear all of that. They just want us to tick a box. And so for me, my work is focused on really creating the space to have these nuanced conversations that are so important to advance our critical insight into how it is that we demystify certain misconceptions, how it is that we decolonialize our own art and our own voice, and really chart a way forward for new models of coexistence to be. If we are taking all of this new money that is being put into Black films, but we're using the same models of filmmaking that they have used to oppress us. So what you find often is in the act of actually making a film, the experience becomes very traumatic. Right? I like to say, because we are still using the same things, we're still dealing with each other like that's not your role, that's not your responsibility, but we're creating art, not just from a commercial lens. You know, and I think that very often we lose sight of that. So myself as an artist, as an actress, evolving into writing and directing in order to control the narrative and producing both narrative and non-scripted content. I find it important to even go beyond the Bob Marley that people want to sit at. Bob Marley was a revolutionary. He wasn't just a singer and one of the most popular artists that you've ever heard. One Love was one of the most revolutionary statements that he has ever reiterated, because it was first said by Marcus Garvey. And if we know the legacy of Marcus Garvey, we know he wasn't talking about, let's just get together and feel all right. He was talking about African liberation. So my role today as the eldest of my generation within this family, I feel a great responsibility to refocus our energies from being entertainers to really to being concerned about what is happening in the world and how it is that we can use our art to give a platform for these conversations to be had. But One Love was a great film. I'm not taking anything away from it. It's a full film. It was really emotional. The first time I watched it, I cried the whole film. I mean, I helped with the casting in some elements. I hadn't read the script, but you know, experiencing my family's trauma on big screen with others around me experiencing it as entertainment, I think it's just another reminder of why it is important to create more context into the work that it is that we're doing beyond the celebrity.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow. I'm aware of time, but I do want to come back to some of the things you said, Donisha, but I'm just going to pass over to Raquel.
Absorbing it.
I know. You've obviously made that same transition from acting to behind the camera. Maybe you could talk a bit about, what that experience has been like for you. And what are the kind of stories that you're telling from that perspective now?
Yeah, absolutely. It actually was interesting. You said something about being angry. And it reminded me, one of my closest collaborators is Denzel Whitaker, and he's a fabulous Black filmmaker in LA. And I went over to his house one day and we were shooting a self-tape, and I was talking about the struggles that I was having. And I was so tired of having to fight for every single thing, particularly as a woman. It's a completely different battle that you're dealing with. And he just looked at me and he goes, "I can't wait for you to get angry enough." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "You'll know." And I was like, it made me even more like frustrated in the moment. And about 6 months later, I walked through his front door and I said, "I'm angry enough." And he goes, "There it is. Talk to me. What are we doing?" And I had been sitting on this idea of wanting to play this particular Italian woman that I can't talk about just yet, but wanting to share her story and really what she did for Italian women, for women in film, at a time where women didn't have a voice, particularly women of an ethnic background. And I always had this bright idea that like, oh, someone would have a great idea to make this movie and I'll audition for it and it'll all be hunky-dory, yada. No. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm just going to do this myself. And then sitting there as an actor who'd been fighting uphill, I was like, what do I do? How do I do this? So I went to text, I went to archives, and I just started reading her story and reading stories about other Italian women and just what it was like. And there's a lot of, going off of what Donisha was saying as well, there's a lot of inter-race racism and things that people don't understand, that like complexities of culture, that we're not all just one thing. So like in Italy, there's a big difference between the North and the South, and like even just small, community differences, like the dialect of Italian that my family speaks, my mom speaks, is considered dirty Italian. And even today I ran into someone and said like, oh, my mother speaks Shoshana, blah, blah. And they're like, oh yeah. And I was like, correct. And it's such a weird experience because I always thought it was so cool. And I didn't realize that it was different until I got older and started to have these fights. And so I was just like, all right, fine. I'll do it myself. No one else can do it better than me because I know. And it's the complexities of the culture. And there are things that you just can't know unless you're in it. So who better to tell these stories than us?
Exactly. Well, yes. I wanted to ask you, I guess, thinking revolutionary, but also thinking from like a dream space, I guess. And it's going to be quite an expansive question, but I just, maybe we could all kind of speak to, thinking revolutionary, like what would you kind of dream about in terms of maybe your own storytelling or our industry and the stories that are getting told? Like, what is it that you want to see? What structures you want to see broken down? There's a very big question, but in the kind of good job we haven't some extra time. But anyone can take that. But just leading from that kind of.
I think I'm going to refer this to Donisha and her family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like Bob Marley's life story is one of the books in my studio, and it's there on the bookcase. And I remember there was always one part of the story where Bob speaks to Rita and he says to her, you know, why do people don't understand what I'm trying to do? And that really hit me because it's like when you have a vision to do something, you're always thinking, why don't people understand? But then there's another block for us as Black people. And that is that, and I'm going to be revolutionary when I say this, we don't think like white people. We, Black people and white people we don't think the same way. We don't conceive of ideas in the same way. Yeah. We don't think of the conceptualization of our ideas in the same way. Yeah. So what we find is that we come up with genius ideas and then sit in front of people who have no idea of the idea that we are pitching to them. Yeah. So for me, the revolutionary thing is when I go to bed and dream at night of the big dreams of a creative, I dream about what would our landscape of the film industry look like in TV and film look like if we had the freedom to commit to the ideas that we come up with. Yeah. Because believe me, we know how to make entertainment. Yeah. We've been doing entertainment for years. Yeah. But I think that there's, like I said, a revolutionary thought for me would be what would the type of films we make look like? What would the stories we tell look like? Yeah. And what would the characters that become the folklore of further generations, what would they look like without the interventions of people that are culturally illiterate and don't understand our stories?
How cool though too, like we think differently, like men and women think differently, like Black and whites think why would we only want to see from one perspective? And I think that's so beautiful to be like,
can't just keep the story, contained. I was saying yesterday that I saw this thing and it's I paraphrase, but it was like and butchering this phrase, but it said something like how can one culture's stories be representative of all cultures' stories? And that's just, that's idiocy, if idiocy is a word.
Yeah. So anybody else wanted to
Son of all.
and Donisha as well, do jump in if you.
Yeah, for sure. I think two main things to say on the topic. One, we have to be careful in pursuit of success as defined by the industry, that we lose sight of the vision and the impact that our stories really can and should make. You know, we have to be very careful of that. I mean, other people would call it selling out, but it's not necessarily a matter of selling out. It's a matter of trying so hard to attain something that doesn't benefit the community in the long run. I think very often filmmakers, we have this thing where, okay, we don't have a distributor already locked in, we need to do the film festival route, and then we need to do all of this, but then we say that we're doing it for the community, but then the community never gets access to the film. If it doesn't get on a platform, then they don't see the film, and the conversation doesn't continue. Then was this just a vain work of art? You know, so I think that we need to be a little bit more intentional about how we make impact with the work that we're doing. And my most recent project that's coming out soon is called 50 Days in Africa, where my production partner and I, and I'm used to John's friend, we went to the continent in Jamaica's 50th year of independence, when all of our politicians went to England. They brought all of our independence celebrations to England to watch Hussein go run, which is great because he's a phenomenal human. But at the same time, to have all of these creatives in the 50th year who have more people who are totally depressed, we made the effort to go to the continent to say, all right, well, let's build our film industry by creating opportunities to bridge a gap and collaborate with creatives on the continent. What does this look like? We moved across 6 countries, and what we found was that Africa, now we know, is not the dark continent that they want to tell us it is. It has been creating models from a long time ago. At that time, they had more advanced technology than we had in Jamaica. So I feel like we are looking the wrong way. And the revolution will come when we start to really look to the grassroots and try to build that up, because that, those are audiences that are loyal.
Yeah. Thanks. Just want to invite anybody to respond.
I actually had a thought about hearing all of this and hearing that there's a similar, like you said earlier, there's a similar thread line. And I think it's really important that when you find people that have that similar thing, supporting them in theirs as well. Like I found with my friend that I mentioned earlier, Denzel, he doesn't understand what I deal with as a woman or as an Italian woman, the stories that I'm upset that aren't being told, but his support of me fully and just listening, and then vice versa with me and his stories. I think that's so important to do with people that you collaborate with, and to lift them up. And then when you do make it into that success, reaching back and helping the next generation of people to also do that.
Okay. I saw you picking it up.
Yeah. No, it's what Donisha said about selling out. There's people always ask me how the films that I make, how they remain so centrally Black, but at the same time universal in their storytelling. And I always say, it's not the first time I've said this, I consider all my projects to be my babies, but I look at who I'm going to hand my babies to. Yeah. I don't want no one dropping my baby. Yeah. So, if you're in the room and you come up with, you tell me something, it's a note, whatever it is. Yeah. And I think you're going to drop my baby, I ain't handing you the baby. So I don't abdicate my responsibility to ensure the vision of the project remains the vision that was set out. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not inflexible. I don't want to be inflexible. But what it means is that I think a lot of projects, to get the money, to receive the funding, to receive the accolades, we accept the things that people tell us, even if it's to the detriment of the project. I don't do that. I make sure that I couldn't sleep well at night if I do that.
Yeah. Staying true to your values.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could sit in this conversation for a long time, but I'm aware there's one more session after. So I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here, for your insight, for your words, for your wisdom. And yeah, thank you Donisha online, and thank you everyone for being here in the space with us.